Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're all refreshed for the fourth session. And for the first time, which is slightly strange, we're going to have a panel discussion, which apparently hasn't happened before, so it's a first. And in the chair is our patron, John Lawton, who I will hand over to now. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Hello. Some of the audience have got bubonic plague. They're not here. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming back. This is an experiment. It's the first time we've had a panel discussion at the National Biodiversity Network Conference. On my right-hand side there, we've got Fiona Burns, who is the Principal Conservation Scientist for RSPB. And then on my left here, we've got Deb Muscat, who is Association of Local Environmental Record Centres, otherwise known as ALERT, not ALERT. National Recorder, and then on my immediate right, David O'Brien, who's the Biodiversity Evidence and Reporting Manager for NatureScot. What we're going to do is the first question is going to go up on the board. Is it there? Thank you. I could do with a rear view mirror here that I can see what's going on, which basically is, and what I'm going to do is ask the panel to answer that question, the same with the second question. That will raise, I think, a series of issues, and then we'll open up a discussion on the third question to the floor, and then I will get the panel members to basically to sum up. So the first question is what has already been doing well to promote the value of data on the state of nature in the UK. What's your take on that?
Okay, well, I had a look at my mailing list this morning, and there are about 70 different local environmental record centres of various shapes and sizes across from the top of Scotland right down to the Channel Islands, and valuing data and talking about it is really at the heart of what they do. And they use it to inform and educate and inspire people. And as most of them are sort of led by stakeholders, that data users and data providers, I think they're really motivated to make sure that, well, who better really to oversee the data than those two sets of people. So they do talk about it a lot, but they also spend a lot of time trying to make that data better. And probably a bit more nerdy, they like to find the flaws in it and what the gaps are, and then talk about that, and working in partnership with local organisations or national organisations, local citizens, they then try and rectify that gap. They're also doing lots of things around adding value, so atlases and biodiversity hotspot maps, habitat suitability modelling, all of those things are really great ways of telling stories using data. Many play an important role in being the voice of good data at local decision making, especially when there are other priorities involved like health and education and economy. So they can often be a voice that wouldn't otherwise be there. They do like to share their data, and they do talk about promoting data standards. They often identify risks in decision making if there is poor data, and perhaps will showcase where examples of projects that have been developed and data has been thought through in the development stage, the delivery and the legacy stage as well. And then they love best to feed back what difference it's actually made, whether it's been fed into the State of Nature report or whether it helped divert that housing association road or whatever from doing a piece of work in a place they love to walk in. So I think they're talking about it all of the time.
Very good. Well, David and then Fiona, then we'll start at this end next time.
Right, okay. I don't know if Fiona was lead author on the State of Nature report, but so maybe if you, I'm going to do a little bit of microcosm and you do the big picture if that makes any sense. So one of the things that I enjoyed most about State of Nature is that it is citizen science driven. Virtually all of the stats in there come from I'm going to say people like you. It's people like us. Murdo's somewhere in the audience and probably tell me how many records I've submitted into NBN via the High and Biological Recording Group, but it is records from people like us, and that it's getting seen and talked about in Parliament, in the UK and in Scotland. But the thing that really made the difference to me, I was on a train, and there were 4 people sitting opposite me, and they were talking about one of the indicators in there. And there were just ordinary people, but they were saying how concerned they were, having read a piece in, I think it was the Metro, about the state of nature. And it was reaching ordinary people and affecting what they thought. And they were reminiscing about how they used to see more butterflies and so on, and wondering about what they could do. And that is the real power of data in ordinary people's lives.
Thank you, David. Right, Fiona, you get the last word on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, sort of coming at it from a sort of macro point of view. But yeah, I think it is a really great way to show the value of this data is sort of via describing these broad changes via biodiversity indicators such as the government indicators and the ones used in state of nature, which yeah, I had the pleasure of helping to coordinate since the first one. And you know, it's actually amazed me today that we've heard so much about it. And you know, that's really great, and actually to see that so many of the 60+ organisations are with us, or representatives of them are with us in the audience today. But for those who are less familiar with it, hopefully that's not many of us, but the reports just really aim to be an agreed evidence base on how, across the nature conservation sector, on how biodiversity is faring. And as far as possible, the impact of different pressures and the impact of conservation. And yeah, we really obviously just wouldn't be able to do any of that without this sort of rich resource that we have in the collected biodiversity records and monitoring data, and all the people that, you know, the very skilled people who collect it. And we really try to emphasize that in the headlines of the report. And as sort of David was mentioning, the reports have really sort of huge media reach. I think our ComStat was that there was 22.5 million opportunities to see the most recent report in the press. And I think that has had tangible impact. But I think even more, what I've been struck with is the kind of policy impact that they've had. And when we heard the Cabinet Secretary talking quite a lot about it this morning, and also, you know, the latest report has been, presentations have been given to director-level cross-government groups in Westminster, you know, people, directors of like the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Education, and there was, you know, the parliamentary motion in the Scottish Parliament, which on the state of nature, which got cross-party support. And I think, you know, over the course of the decade that we've been producing them, they really have made sort of a tangible difference to how the environment in this country is sort of seen by policymakers, and also sort of, to a certain extent, getting across that sort of, you know, the critical nature of that underpinning evidence base.
Thank you, Fiona. So the inverse of that, guys, is what are the gaps in our data? What do we need to do better? So, go on, Fiona.
Back to me. I suppose so. I was sort of doing the last question sort of from as my role as the Secretariat of the State of Nature Partnership. But I think this one here, sort of thinking from an RSPB perspective, and I should say I'm of one of many principal scientists at the RSPB, so yep. Anyway, but I think one thing that we are going to try to do, and we're committed to do, is really do that first step in being better at sharing the data. The RSPB collects an awful lot of biodiversity information from our sort of site monitoring. We've got more than 200 reserves, and from our research and from the national monitoring schemes that we run, for example, including citizen science, things like Big Garden Birdwatch even. And we're great at sharing some of this, but we could do a lot better. And I hope some of you have seen our stand upstairs that my colleagues have been manning, sort of giving much more detail about what we're going to do. But basically, we're just going to try to be much better at mobilising the data that we have so that it can be used and valued better. But one of my colleagues did tell me yesterday that Big Iron Birdwatch is sitting at 500 million records, so might be a phased approach to this, given that that's double the size of the NBN at the moment.
They're all sparrows and robins.
They are.
Actually, they're not, interestingly. Debs.
Okay, I am one of these people that do go around with the State of Nature report underneath my arm and go, have you seen this? And then people say to me, well, what's it like locally? And that, for me, has been a difficulty because some parts of the country, at sort of a regional and a county level, have a state of nature. But I lived in a part of the world that doesn't have a state of the nature. So we can't actually convert easily across the nation what's in your fantastic report to what it actually means locally. And I think that can be really difficult in the world that record centres are operating in. Sometimes I think where where it works really well is where there's really good statutory leadership. So that's either, you've got a local authority that really is interested in environment and puts environment at the heart of their policy and decision making, and therefore they tend to invest in it. And therefore that's where we've got strong record centres and strong data and all the bells and whistles that I'd like to see absolutely everywhere. But if you're in a part of the country that doesn't have that leadership, then you have to struggle with what you've got. You're sort of really making do and mending stuff. It's inconsistent across the nations as well, and I just love the fact that BBD is in the government document, and you're committed to supporting it and building on it. And I think leadership at that level, it's not about dictating what you actually have to do, but give us a shared goal, which I think the BBD project is, which currently in England is lacking. And I think the data is there locally, but it's quite difficult to find. And Natalie this morning said one of the things they produced this report, and pulling all the data together was quite difficult to evidence the decision making that she needs as a lawyer. And again, that's quite difficult for local authorities. The evidence might be there, but it's difficult to get, and record centres can get it, may or may not be able to get it. It's a real mix due to the fact that there's sort of so many mixed funding models. It's completely inconsistent. Some are totally self-reliant on just what they can raise themselves. Others have got great support from government agencies and local authorities and other sources. So it's a real mixed bag, and I don't think that helps provide a consistent message.
Thank you. And David?
Well, firstly, I agree with what Fiona said about some of us as organisations, and I'll put Nature Scott in the frame here, we've got a lot better at making sure our records are available. There's still a way to go. The same is also true of a lot of the consultancy work that gets done. I'm deliberately not making eye contact with the one consultant I know here who puts in a phenomenal number of records onto NBN, including some very exciting invertebrates. But sadly, I've made eye contact. Sadly, that is every thing. Sadly, he is a minority there, and that's a phenomenal data that can help biodiversity. I was asked for one thing, so you're going to get three. The second is how easy it is to submit records, and it's getting a lot easier. And one of the things that really I found heartening today was looking at approaches to make it easier to get your records in there and get them available real time, rather than, we all like going out and seeing things and observing them. Very few of us like filling out the form and emailing it off with all the records or whatever it was, and then you go through and realise that you didn't really know how to spell, I don't know, whatever species.
Chironomid.
Yeah, well, some of the more, and what you always thought was Brian cyclophyllum is actually something completely different. Yeah, and you go through all of that. It's no fun, but it's getting a lot easier, and that is absolutely great. And the third thing, which is, we've got a lot of records on birds. Well, They haven't. There's a lot of records on flowering plants, and also some of the real glamour taxa, like herptiles, obviously. But some of the other groups, it's getting people interested in them, because people will record what they find fascinating, what they find interesting, and it's getting people interested, particularly many of the invertebrate groups, and things like bryophytes and lichens and fungi, which are seen as difficult. I'm not saying they're easy, but as with all of these things, their entry tax are in it, that you can make a start on some of the groups that are easier to do. And a lot of these things, it's even something to do with bryophytes while you're waiting for the bus, because there's going to be Mercantia polymorpha in the cracks in the pavement, and there's going to be Bryomargentium, what I refer to as the dog piss, dog urine moss, around the lampposts, because it likes that. So there's always stuff you can do, and it's just getting people there. It doesn't matter, you don't have to go to the cairngorms, beautiful as they are. The stuff around you can record, and it's better than just sitting there staring out into space or looking at your damn phone.
Very good. Thank you, three. Now, there's a chance, I don't know how long we've got how many questions you want to ask, but you've now heard what the panelists have said about those two topics, and the general question is, the final question is, what's one thing we could do? But why don't you ask the panelists to clarify or disagree with the panelists on any of the points that they have made, and keep it very short or I'll stop you. It is not a speech, it's a quick question to the panelists. The gentleman there.
Yeah, just a quick one. I think what's demonstrated is we're doing really well at either end. We're doing really well, as you said, on getting more entries in, and really good at getting impact with the data in terms of getting policy discussions going. I'm wondering whether there's more we need to do about the story in the middle, the story about who does or who collects the data, who manages the data, who analyses it.
We understand the question, that's great.
Great, I'll stop.
Who wants to go and have an answer?
Yeah, shall I take it?
You take it, David.
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the things that we did do in State of Nature, I think it's on page 2, it's very near the beginning, and it goes out and thanks all the people that are providing this. And again, when we did the butterfly indicator earlier this week, we thanked all the people and put a link into the scheme. And I think that's key to it. Whenever we use these things, we need to have the hook at the end. If you found this interesting, get involved. This is how you do it. And also showing, as you did earlier with the awards, some of the stories of people who are getting out there and, hey, I could do that. And those inspirational stories.
Thank you. Anybody want to add to that? No, any next question? Anybody goes? Lady at the back there.
So one of the pain points that...
You'll have to lift your voice, because...
Yes, sorry. One of the pain points that I regularly have is when doing habitat restoration, there is a fragmentation of data when it comes to protected species. Now, it does make sense that a lot of the protected species are not available to the public with regards to exact locations because of the sensitivity of the information. But I was wondering whether there was anything that you might be able to do in order to collate that data so I don't have to send out 80 emails in order to get one data point.
Okay, good point. Anybody want to take that? Record Centre?
I absolutely agree with your sentiment. I know from personal experience that that is still the case. And as ALERC has contributed to the geospatial commissions on data pathway, and that's our concern too, that you have to ask 80 people instead of just going to one source. So that's just a fact at the moment, and it's a reality, but I think it's one that virtually everyone in this room is trying to do their very best to change that.
I only just to briefly mention what Helen said earlier was that the NBN appears to be working on better rules to kind of blur those sensitive records, so hopefully that would encourage more people to be having those made available at an appropriate resolution.
Thank you, good question. Gentleman right up the back at the left-hand side there.
You mentioned that consultant ecologists are not very good at sharing data. That's our experience as well in the local record centre. So I would like to ask you how you think that could be done better, maybe, and just make a statement as well, which is that can we have a concerted effort to try and make them do it?
I think you're completely right. I think one of the first things is to try and recognise and celebrate people who are doing the right thing, and in part do that in ways of showing the consequence of this, that as a result of so-and-so sharing information about such and such a spider, this site has been saved. And it's that kind of thing. I think it's important. There's also possibly, and there's plenty of Nature's Got colleagues in the audience here who may hate me for saying this, but possibly a bit of leverage sometimes on the, well, if you're going to make this, if we're making a decision based on this, then the information should be available to people in that local community and anywhere else have a legitimate right to see it, so they can comment on it.
Thank you. One more. Gentleman at there, just at the back, on the left again.
When in the current public debate, the largest or most important minister of the land doesn't understand an exponential curve, how do we make data more interesting and easier to understand for the public at large? Because at that point, it becomes useful.
When I was teaching sort of bit simple maths in the biology department in York as a young lecturer, one of the ways I used to explain exponential curves is the analogy that Paul Ehrlich used. You know, the lily in the pond doubles every week, but the frog thinks it's great because there's lots of water and only 2 lily leaves. Just work out how long it takes before when the pond is half covered in water lilies. Still great for the frog until next time it doubles. That's exponential growth. Make it quite easy to understand if you've got more than 2 nerve cells. Right. Final words from each of the panelists. Just, if you know, would you, one thing would you do to show, use the data we've got better, apart from trying to teach the Prime Minister about exponential curves?
Yeah. I was just going to...
the answer might be you don't know.
I mean, there's lots of things. I'm not sure this is just one example, probably. But I think I was just going to agree with the gentleman who just asked that question. And something that I noted down was, like, can we be even better at communicating? Can we do better at sort of understanding our audiences, tailoring to different audiences, and sort of understanding what's going to resonate with them, what they're going to find meaningful, you know, and then, you know, even could we be doing better at sort of getting into more the sort of creative sphere, thinking of better ways to visualize data, or just, you know, completely alternative ways of putting across our messages. So yeah, that would be my suggestion.
I think for those of you who saw the news story earlier this week, that the fastest growing internet search term is climate anxiety, and that's in English, that's in Mandarin, it's in Arabic, it's in Italian, it's a whole raft of languages. We have got to make sure that our message has some hope with it. And whilst we're saying, yes, we have a biodiversity crisis, to show some of the data that at least shows that, yes, but in some cases we have fixed it, therefore we can do more and fix it in more places. So keeping the hope.
I think certainly we often talk to people who already know. So I think there's a lot more about getting people who understand, who are experts in communication, to sit alongside experts who know about data, use their skills to make the data look interesting, and use the skills of the marketing people to get it out there. And also make the most of our networks, because whatever we do, somebody has to explain it. So make the most of the experts in your network and make sure they have the right information.
And if I can have one suggestion as well, I thought one of the things that does fill me with hope is that we've heard some wonderful young people today, really, really dedicated, committed, bright, and they understand what the issue is. We just have to let some of the daft old politicians die. And everything will be all right. Thank you. Do you want me to go on? Yeah, go. Okay.
Do we stay or do we go?
And this is a daft old biologist. This is my last occasion as patron of the NBN. I became a patron in 2018, and after 5 years, for family reasons, I can't actually continue for another year. But I was asked to sort of ruminate on what's happened over the period of my period as a patron. And I was delighted initially to be asked to be a patron because for a very considerable part of my career as a scientist, I just mined other people's data, legally. But, you know, things like trends in population numbers, species distributions, and biodiversity hotspots. And in the 70s and 80s, when I was doing that ecological science, it largely involved manually squinting at graphs on paper and counting dots in published atlases by hand. That's how we did it. Even though the maps were pretty much state-of-the-art, there was no automatic way of retrieving the data in any way. So what an incredible transformation there's been in the period when I first was a scientist, and not least actually in the period while I've been a patron. You know, the whole process by which we can now access huge amounts of reliable environmental data on the distributions and abundances of plants and animals is truly staggering. And something to be really, really proud of as a scientific and recording community. As patron, of course, I haven't done very much. I'm largely a symbolic figure, but I was able, when I first took over, to help the NBN interaction with Natural England, and persuaded Tony Juniper to go and see, for a meeting to have with Tony Juniper, the chair of Natural England, and Neil and the other colleagues were able to persuade Natural England of the value of recording data. You know, you can't conserve something until you know what you've got, and you can't know whether you're being effective unless you know whether populations are increasing and decreasing. And if I did anything, it was to help Natural England make contact with NBN and for Neil and to persuade Tony Juniper and his colleagues that these things were really, really important. There's no question now that Natural England recognised that. The NBN Atlas, of course, which now allows us to access all these kinds of fantastic data, was brand new in 2018. In the year I became patron, it was an absolutely brand new tool to where it's come to today. And I've had no influence over that at all. I've just simply watched with vicarious pleasure to see the growth of this organisation into a really powerful conservation and scientific tool. I don't have time to mention them all, and in fact we've heard about every single one of the things I was going to say, isn't it great, today. So since the launch in 2021, the iNaturalist UK has seen an incredibly rapid uptake, and there are now over 100,000 people across the UK recording via the platform. It's staggering. In 2022, the Trust new strategy was launched together with our new mission statement, which is making data work for nature. And that really summarises what the NBN is about succinctly and very accurately. And of course, in 2022, the Trust took ownership of the Better Biodiversity Data Project, working to enhance access to Scotland's biodiversity data. And there are other things that Trust has done as well. I don't have time to add to them. But it's a very, very exciting story of growth and growing maturity in a great organisation. And to deliver on that, the Trust's staff numbers have doubled. It was 7 when I became patron. It's now 14. And that allows the Trust to take on a lot more work. We could clearly do with more staff. I'm sure Lisa could if we had the money. But you know, we've got doubled our staff, and we're really making huge progress. We could do a lot more if we had more staff. And also, I'm a huge fan of citizen science, and the NBN does that in spades. And the growth of citizen science and the ability of just the lay members of the public, and I use lay in inverted commas because many of them are extremely expert scientists. I love the German word for amateur scientists. I can't remember what it was, but I've written it down. It was something like fraudulent amateurs or something. I think that's how it translates. They're fraudulent amateurs, because they're not really amateurs at all. And that growth in citizen science is a really very, very exciting, very heartwarming development. And if people are interested in recording, they're interested in caring about the natural environment. And if they care about the natural environment, they'll help us to do something to protect it. The development of identification apps, of course, which I'm about as mechanical as a bent hairpin, as one of my technicians described me. So I don't use identification apps because I'm really not very good at it. But they've transformed, again, the ability of ordinary people to, and amateurs of all levels of knowledge to contribute and study nature and contribute records and get involved in nature. And that, again, is a really important transformation of the public landscape, where if people care enough to want to record, they're going to care enough to look after the landscape and the creatures that live in it. So I'm on record as saying that the UK has one of the best monitored and recorded and most messed up flora and fauna in the world. In fact, I didn't use the word messed up, I said buggered up. And what I'd like to leave you with the thought, I mean, today I really began to realise what we've heard today is the message is that the UK has the best documented recovering flora and fauna in the world. And for being involved in the last year, I'm very, very proud of being involved for the last year. And all I say to Lisa and her crew and all the recorders is just carry on the good work and thank you.
Thank you, John. And before moving on, I didn't want to go through the conference without thanking John for his contribution as patron since 2018. On a personal note, I've thoroughly appreciated him opening doors, adding weight to a cause, adding to these conferences, or just sharing with me his enormous expertise and wisdom. But I wanted to let my predecessor and friend of John's, Professor Michael Hassel, provide some words about John and why we are so appreciative of his time as patron. So if you permit me just to read out what Michael sent through. John is one of the world's foremost ecologists, having published literally hundreds of important ecological research papers on population dynamics and the ecological science underpinning key questions in biodiversity. This led to his election to the Royal Society in 1989 and to the US National Academy of Science. It has also led to a coupleful of prizes, including President's Gold Medal of the British Ecological Society, the very prestigious Japan Prize, and the RSPB Medal, and many others. Apart from his huge academic achievements, John became Chief Executive of the Natural Environment Research Council and was then appointed Chairman of the Royal Commission of Environmental Pollution in 2005. Since then, his emphasis has been mainly on impacts of global environmental change on wild animals and plants. And as chair of the RSPB, he was instrumental in establishing their strategy for protecting landscapes. In 2010, he chaired a review group that has really shaken things up with the so-called Lawton Report, otherwise known as Making Space for Nature. This has had a huge impact on how the UK's wildlife needs to be conserved and managed. More recently, he is overseeing the UK's approach to rewilding and continues to be a highly influential chairman of the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. In short, no one in this country has had such a profound influence on shaping the way forward on managing our biodiversity. Personally, I see that John oozes passion about the natural world. He's an educator, he gets things done, and he gets it done in that wonderfully northern way. So thank you, John, for your time as patron. Now handing over to our speaker, our CEO, Lisa, on the art of data.
Thank you. Here we go again. Well, when I came up with this talk topic, I had no idea that the panel was going to tee it up so nicely. So thank you very much, panel members. Delighted to give the final talk of the conference. Now, you know that thing where you write the title of a talk before you've actually worked out what you're going to talk about. Yeah, that's one of those. So in actual fact, probably this is a more accurate description of what I'm going to talk about. And on the subject of audience participation, please, if you have one to hand, get out your phone and connect to the Wi-Fi NMS Public. It'll take you to a login page, but you then just have to click to get connected if you're not already. Don't worry, it's not anything scary. It's something fabulous and fun that'll come towards the end of my talk. So yeah, get connected on now while I start the presentation. So why talk about creativity and emotion when we're the data people, right? We're the nuts and bolts and none of this, fancy stuff. But quite simply, what we're doing is not working fast enough. We know this. We know it from the State of Nature report. We know that decisions against nature continue apace, and if not unabated, then certainly, not brought to a screeching halt as they need to. We're all working so hard, but it's one step forward and two steps back. And I noticed a picture of David Bellamy in Charlotte's presentation earlier, and it took me back to a conference I went to many years ago. I think it was the 21st anniversary of the year of underwater conservation that led to the foundation of the Marine Conservation Society. So that would place the conference in the late 90s sometime. And David Bellamy, as the president of the MCS, stood on the stage and threw down the gauntlet and said, "We have presided over 21 years of marine destruction." And that phrase has stuck with me ever since, horrified me at the time, and it's just scarred me emotionally, I think. But that was 25 years ago. And I'm not going to say we've presided over further environmental destruction, but, we're pouring, working our hearts out in this, and it's not having the impact that it needs to. We're not getting there fast enough. And this might be, heresy for Chief Exec of the NBN Trust to say this, but data isn't enough by itself. We all know this, really. Data is our day job, but we need to be doing more. So what needs to change? Well, quite simply, we need to change the decision-making process. So really, my talk is coming at this from two angles. First of all, and this was teed up beautifully by the panel discussion, how can we be more creative in our communication in a way that gets that message across in a more compelling way, to get greater engagement and better decisions for nature, so the output of creativity, if you like. But then also, how can we nurture creativity in ourselves, in our teams, in our networks, to feed that creativity in communication, so that input side as well. And in case you're kind of squinting at that middle image and what the hell is going on there, I'm just going to zoom in on it, because this is what happens when you ask the AI Bing to produce an illustration to show along the subject of data for biodiversity in Scotland. That's what you get. And what on earth is that flying furry donut? What is it? I don't know, but yeah, there's always going to be room for the human brain in these things, right? Okay, so what do we know about decision-making? How do we get better decision-making? Whether it's a politician deciding or a civil servant deciding to sign off on the budget of one of our nature conservation agencies, or whether it's an individual deciding whether or not they're going to start wildlife recording or carry on with wildlife recording. We know that evidence, information, of course, is vital to that, and there's no diminishing it. But nonetheless, there are other factors at play. And before starting my talk, I re-listened to the fantastic presentation at last year's conference from Bryony Pound, who talked about what really goes on in our brains when we're making decisions and all the things that can get in the way of a sound decision. But we also know that emotion is really important. You know, this has been known for decades that in order to actually make a decision, there's this surge of emotion that helps us make that decision. And more recent evidence shows that that's even more relevant when we're making decisions related to moral decisions, social or financial. That emotional component is all the more important. And then the other factors, which are the things that Bryony really spoke about last year, are things like, very human factors like time of day and decision fatigue. It seems we only have so much decision juice in our brains, and when it gets low, we make lazy decisions. We take shortcuts. We rely upon unconscious biases on what the first idea we had was, or what our friends suggested as the best thing to do. So there's all this stuff going on. The emotion is really important. And how do we engage people's emotions to make the right decision for nature? So one of the things we can do is better storytelling with our data. And I'm not going to dwell on this, but just highlight a couple of examples that I think have great potential. So things like the biodiversity stripes. This came from biodiversitystripes.info. The NBN Trust has also done some great stuff with this around Isle of Man data. But this is showing UK farmland birds and the decline in biodiversity over the last 50 years. And it's, if we have someone who doesn't understand exponentials, for example, or other fairly simple mathematical concepts, then maybe something like this is more compelling. And then similarly, this is a lovely one from the Common Cause for Nature report in 2012, which is showing BTO's data on starling numbers as a murmuration. And again, just more creative, more immediately understandable without having to know your way around percentages and graphs and so on. But then another way of that creative, getting that emotional impact is around art-science collaboration. And I'm just going to highlight a couple here that people within the network told me about. One is the Dataset Stream, a collaboration between the Biological Records Centre and an artist. And the starting concept for this was, if data could talk, what would it say in this time of declining populations of our beautiful butterflies and moths? And it was part of the Decide project, which we've heard about at NBN conferences before. And so go and look it up. Really fascinating, beautiful and thought-provoking art that maybe engages us in ways that tap into that emotion. And then I don't know if you've heard of the Hot Poets, but they're currently running a project called Haiku Futures, which is encouraging communities and individuals to share haiku that will then be presented at COP28, encouraging us to think or to paint a better future through poetry. But what is creativity and how do we tap into it? So it's not just a social and cultural construct. Creativity is something that happens in your brain. It's a psychological and cognitive process. And it essentially creates novel connections across, seemingly disparate areas of thought. And what it requires is working memory. So you need to have that kind of capacity within your mind to access it. You need an openness to new experiences and thoughts. There's an interesting combination of inhibiting and disinhibiting. So inhibiting some of those shortcuts that our brain takes. So like jumping to the first thought we had and then anchoring on it and not letting any other thoughts come in because we had this first thought and we love it. But at the same time, disinhibiting the natural sort of barriers we have within our minds that stop that, that fantastic flow of ideas that you can kind of get in a really well-run brainstorming session. So it's inhibiting, it's disinhibiting that real creative flow of ideas, and it's connecting disparate items. And interestingly, it uses the whole brain. So this isn't a left brain or a right brain thing. Verbal creativity tends to use left brain. Visuospatial creativity tends to use right brain, and interesting, musical creativity involves both hemispheres. And then different parts of your brain, so prefrontal cortex, cerebellum, and other parts of your brain are all involved. So we all need to be accessing all of our brains to be tapping into that inherent creativity that we all have. But when does it happen? You know this. you haven't had your best ideas at your desk. You've had them down the pub or on your bike or sitting on a lonely cliff top. What also helps is being in a positive emotional state. Being happy or excited helps generate creativity much more than negative or passive environmental states. Exposing ourselves to new experiences, new knowledge, new environments, allowing your mind to wander is one of the most significant things. So 20% of best ideas are reported to come from when your mind is wandering. Now, personally, I would have thought it was more than 20%, but that 20% is very important because people self-cite that as the real eureka moments have come when their mind has just been wandering and they haven't been focused on the task or subject at hand. And then finally, this is a new word I learned just a few days ago, hypnagogia, which is that fantastic kind of trippy state between wakefulness and sleep, when your brain fires off in all sorts of directions and makes really novel connections. And that is when we are at our most creative and when many of these eureka moments happen, although actually people self-report that if they then review those ideas in 6 months' time, some of them were absolute garbage, but there were some real nuggets in there as well. So how do we make space for creativity in nature? It's tough. You know, I look at my fabulous team who I couldn't be more proud of, but I know with the amount of work we have to do, I know we're not making space for that mind wandering, certainly not in work hours, and for that true creativity to happen. And I think as a movement, as leaders, as teams, as organisations, we need to push back and make space for true creativity because we need to be using the best and the whole of all of our brains to ensure that we're taking creative approaches to communicating what we do and the importance of it. So really this is just my... can I get to my last slide? There we go. Go forth and create. We need to use all of our amazing brains to achieve what we need to do. This isn't, you know, we can't afford just business as usual. We need to throw everything at it, and I know that we will. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. That was gorgeous. I feel fairly mellow now. So, the end of the day. It's difficult to sum up. There's been so much. I do feel a bit of a sort of, when I was jotting down some points, a bit of a feeling, a thread there, which really was three elements to it. One is Natalie's words, demonstrably not hitting targets. And to me, that shows you have to have the political will. And I think our opening speaker showed that certainly north of the border, the political will is there. And let's hope that political will is elsewhere. We've seen loads of information from all of you and your colleagues and your organisations of work that's going on. But I agree with John also that it's that next generation. And I think the young speakers were inspirational. And I think that even more inspirational. And I think that National Education Nature Park was also an inspirational project, because if we can get out to the youth with and the next generation coming through and loving nature, so much the better. I'd like to thank our sponsors, National Museum Scotland, Habitat Aid, Zulu Ecosystems and Nature Metrics. National Museum Scotland, thank you very much for having us here. It's a lovely venue and really enjoyed it. So a special mention made to Rachel Russell and Nick Fraser from the museum, who have been a huge help to the team over a number of months to get the day together, and to our NBN Trust team with Mandy and the rest of the team doing a fantastic effort, as they always do, and securing the speakers and putting the programme together. Superb. Thank you all to the speakers, giving such excellent presentations, and for the panel members as well for our first panel. Finally, thank you all for attending and supporting this year's event. We hope you enjoyed the day. We'd like feedback and comments because it does shape how we pull things together in the future. And there's a questionnaire on our website, the NBN Trust website. And thank you to all those who made a donation during the course of the day. On slightly more prosaic matters than Lisa's left us with, we will be having our AGM in 10 minutes' time. Those delegates who, members who want to vote and stay, they could obviously do so, and any delegates who wish to hang around are more than welcome as well. Hopefully as many of you as possible are going to be coming back to wherever we determine to have it next year, our conference, and providing the leadership of the natural world, which is, as we've heard today, which is, the world is crying out for that. Before departing, I wanted to touch on something that is understandably not necessarily part of the conference, although, and we haven't planned this, it is slightly off the back of Lisa's, I have to say, on reflection, having heard that. But I expect runs like a seam beneath all the activities we've heard today, and that's just a simple appreciation and love of nature for nature's sake. At a conference of experts, we can justifiably, and we have to, get focused on our world using our language. And that we must be aware of, as Lisa rightly touched on there. We need to get out to other people, tell stories, and especially if we want and we need to get as wide an audience as possible. So, at my first conference as chair in 2018, I opened with a poem. I'd be grateful if you would indulge me for a couple of minutes to finish this conference with a poem. It rather goes to the creativity and communications and hot poets that Lisa's just touched on. And as I say, it wasn't planned like that. It will be well known to many of you, and to me it represents the observation of nature, my own record, small though it is, of when birds, swifts, return each year above my London street and garden. That sheer wild wonder and inspiration of nature. And therefore, it touches on why all of your work is so important. So I'll finish with a few lines from a poem I'm sure many of you are familiar with, which is Ted Hughes's poem, Swifts. 15th of May, cherry blossom. The swifts materialize at the tip of a long scream of needle. Look, they're back, look. And they're gone on a steep, controlled scream of skid, round the house end and away under the cherries. Gone. Suddenly, flickering in sky summit, 3 or 4 together, gnat wisp frail and hover searching, and listening for air chills. Are they too early? With a bowing power thrust to left, then to right, then a flicker, they tilt into a slide, a tremble for balance, then a lashing down disappearance behind elms. They've made it again, which means the globe's still working, the creation's still waking refreshed, our summer's still all to come. Have a safe journey home. Thank you.